Whether you're working, retired, running a small business, investing, or expecting to receive an inheritance one day, this budget is going to affect you. Most of the news coverage today is going to focus on house prices, negative gearing, and cost of living. Fair enough. But underneath the politics are three legal mechanisms that could reshape how Australians plan their businesses, investments, retirements, or even inheritance for years to come. I spent years as a police prosecutor and now work as a defence lawyer, and one thing you learn very quickly around legislation is this. The real consequences are usually buried in the drafting, not the press conference. So, in the next 12 minutes, I'm going to show you what these changes actually do, who they affect, what Australians can still do while they're still only proposals, and why, taken together, they reveal something much bigger about the direction Australian lawmaking is starting to move. Because underneath all of this is something so much bigger than tax. The assumption that yesterday's legal decision will still be protected tomorrow. Okay, so one quick important thing before we get into this. Budget night is not the same as legislation passing. Most of these measures still need to go through Parliament before they become law. But modern tax law is increasingly operating from the announcement date long before the drafting settles. And if you don't like where some of these proposals are heading, stay with me, because at the end I'm going to show you the mechanisms and how to use them and how to find them to push back before any of this becomes law. So the first bomb is what's called the undefined trust trap. The government has announced a 30% minimum tax on discretionary trust distributions, and that proposed start date is the 1st of July 2028. And before you switch off thinking that this is only a wealthy person problem, it's not, because the practical reality is it reaches so much further than that. So here's what the budget announcement doesn't give you: a clear legal definition of who is actually caught. The announcement does not actually define which trusts, which distributions, or which beneficiaries, or which exceptions are ultimately captured, because there are promises of carve-outs, transition relief, and rollover provisions, but those don't have any actual legal form yet. They are political assurances, but in law, those are two very different things. So, who are we actually talking about? Well, a tradesperson in Western Sydney distributing income to a wife who works part-time, a dentist in Brisbane with adult children as trust beneficiaries, or a farmer in regional Victoria whose property succession runs entirely through a discretionary trust structure. This is the group likely to feel the practical impact most directly. And right now, none of them can get a straight answer about whether they're inside or outside this law, because that line has not been drawn yet. And when people cannot tell you whether they're inside or outside a future tax rule, they just stop being able to make long-term decisions confidently. That's the rule of law problem, and it's distinct from the tax policy debate. Governments can tax. That's legitimate. But citizens need to know exactly what legal category they fall into before they're required to arrange their affairs around it. Small businesses need to plan. Farmers need to plan. Professional practices, family structures, succession arrangements, they all need legal certainty before they can act. And right now, as I'm speaking to you, that certainly does not exist. Not because the tax rate is wrong, but because the legal categories haven't even been written yet. And notice how much the budget relies on future drafting, future carve-outs, future guidance, future transition mechanisms. That means that Australians are now being asked to arrange their affairs, their lives, around a legal framework that does not yet fully exist. Now, this next one sounds technical, but stay with me because this affects something millions of Australians rely on without even realising it. The assumption that when the government gives you a permanent legal exemption, you can actually build your life around it, because it's permanent. Well, sometimes permanent doesn't mean what you think it does, because Bomb 2 is the pre-1985 reckoning. In 1985, the Hawke government introduced capital gains tax. Before September 20 of that year, assets that you owned were CGT exempt, permanently. That was the guarantee built into the law. Anything acquired before that date sat outside the CGT regime. And people structured their lives around that guarantee for a long time. A farm bought in 1978, a commercial property acquired in 1983, private company interests built before most of us were working. All of them sitting permanently outside that CGT net for 40 years. Now, some of the finance commentary is not getting this 100% right. The government is not proposing to tax the gains that accrued in the past. The history, to the extent of 1 July 2027, appears to be intended to remain exempt. What they are proposing is this. From the 1st of July 2027, future gains on pre-1985 assets, remember this could be anything from commercial interests to land, they fall into the CGT regime. The 40-year exemption is not abolished entirely. It is, however, being brought to a definite end. It ends on a date, and everything that grows after that date is taxable. And for a lot of Australians, these are not abstract assets on a spreadsheet. They're things like family farms, workshops, small industrial properties, and businesses that were intended to be passed to people's children. Because the moment you cap the exemption, you create a baseline, a starting point from which the future CGT is calculated. And for these assets, that baseline has to be the market value as at 1 July 2027, which means someone has to value a farm that hasn't been sold since 1978. Almost 50 years. A family business built across a lifetime and goodwill accumulated over decades. So the question is, using what evidence? Most of these people didn't keep records because the law told them that they would never need to. The asset was permanently exempt. There was no legal reason to document anything. And when the taxpayer's valuation and the ATO valuation don't agree, which they won't routinely, that becomes a dispute, potentially a tribunal hearing, potentially litigation, and for families who can't easily divide or sell a farm to fund the legal argument. The valuation disputes, the evidentiary gaps, and the succession complications for families with illiquid assets, or non-liquid assets, that is the bomb inside this bomb, not the rate, the practical legal machinery required to actually implement it. 40 years of certainty, settled expectations, structured estates, plans made in good faith under the law as it existed. That is what this is beginning to erode. And once you alter the settled legal expectations, the downstream complications don't resolve quickly either. They compound. But as significant as that is, at least those changes operate in the future tense. At least people are being told the rules before the next transaction happens. Because the third bomb is incredibly different. It wasn't buried in the budget papers themselves. It emerged separately through draft Treasury legislation, which was released in April. But legally, it may be the most significant issue. Because the third bomb doesn't just change the rules going forward, it reaches backwards into transactions people believed were already settled. And the third bomb is what we're going to call the retrospective bomb. CPA Australia is not a political organisation. It's a professional body, which means it's conservative, measured, and generally quite careful with its language. So when CPA Australia publicly describes a piece of legislation as alarming, that's a pretty significant statement. And in April 2026, the government released draft legislation changing the CGT rule for foreign residents, specifically how non-residents and Australian expats are taxed on certain Australian assets. On its own, it's not remarkable. Governments adjust tax law, fine. But some of these April 2026 provisions are proposed to operate retrospectively, nearly 20 years ago. A law drafted in 2026 applying to transactions that were completed in 2007, 2011, 2016, 19, transactions that were planned, structured, executed, and completed under the legal rules that existed at the time. The only legal rules that existed at the time. Transactions where people took advice and they met their obligations and moved on. Well, the government is now proposing to retrospectively alter the tax consequences of those transactions that were finished, finalised for 2 decades. Now, to be fair, retrospective legislation is not unheard of in Australia. Governments have often legislated back to announcement dates to prevent people from exploiting a known window. And on that basis, it can be defensible. But nearly 20 years is a very different order of magnitude. And here is where I want to draw a comparison that I think puts this in the proper context. For years, Australia has been told that dramatically altering the rules on liquid natural gas and resource projects, changing the taxation framework mid-contract, risks investment, We've heard it a lot recently. The argument is that investors require stable, predictable rules. If we change the terms after the deal is done, then the capital, the investment, might go somewhere else. That argument has been put forward by many people in Parliament. It has shaped energy and resource policy in this country for a generation at least. So the question that follows is obvious. If legal stability matters for multinational gas investment, if the government accepts that you can't alter the rules on a completed deal without damaging confidence, why would that logic not apply equally to every other investor deciding whether Australia is a predictable place to put capital? Because retrospective legislation does not just change a tax rate, it changes the reliability of the legal environment itself. Then the question stops being what is the tax rate, and it becomes, can I trust the law I relied on today will still be in the law tomorrow? Can I trust Australia? And that shift from tax policy into sovereign risk is what makes this bomb very different from the other two. None of this means that Australia ceases to be a stable country overnight, but it does mean that we should be paying very close attention to the direction of travel, because modern economies run on confidence rather than coercion. Governments need investors, businesses, and ordinary people voluntarily making long-term decisions. And that only works if people believe that the legal framework is reasonably predictable. A legal framework willing to reach back 20 years and alter completed transactions creates a very different relationship between citizens, investors, and the state. And over time, that changes the certainty everything else is built on. So there are three bombs, but there's one central thread. Legal categories that don't exist yet, forcing small businesses and families to plan in the dark. 40 years of settled expectations altered with no clear mechanism for evidentiary disputes that are going to follow, and draft legislation reaching back 20 years to transactions people completed in good faith under the law as it was at the time. These are not fringe concerns, they're rule of law concerns, and the rule of law is not a political position. It's the infrastructure that makes everything else function. The budget will be debated on its merits, and some of these changes might survive that, but the legal problems don't resolve because the politics do. They compound. Practically speaking, here's where things stand. If you have a family trust, start speaking to your accountant now. The planning window before 1 July 2028 is longer than it looks, but the drafting isn't settled, and the advice will evolve as the legislation evolves. If your family holds a pre-1985 asset, remember, this could be a farm, business, or commercial property, get proper valuation advice before 1 July 2027 and start gathering whatever records might exist. And if you are an Australian expat or a non-resident who has transacted on Australian assets in the last 2 decades, get legal advice. The retrospective provisions are still in their draft form, but they are moving. Now, I said at the beginning that I would show you how Australians can still push back while there is time. So here are 3 practical things that you can do. First, watch for the Treasury consultation. When draft legislation is released, Treasury often invites public submissions. You do not need to be a lawyer. You can write a short submission explaining how the proposal affects you, your business, your family, or your investment decisions. Second, watch for the Senate committee inquiries. If the bill is referred to a committee, that committee can receive submissions and sometimes hold hearings. This is where practical problems in drafting can be exposed before the law passes. And third, contact your local MP and your state senators. MPs matter, but senators are especially important where the government needs numbers in the Senate. Be specific. Do not just say, I hate the tax. Nobody likes tax. Explain the uncertainty, the retrospective effect, the valuation problem, or the family business impact, even the public policy aspect, or the fact that this wasn't applied to the gas companies. The point is this: don't wait until the law is finalised and then complain about the consequences. The time to push back is while the drafting is still moving. And because these proposals are still moving through the system, I will put the Treasury consultation portal, the Senate committee page, and the parliamentary contact search in the description and the pinned comment below. And one final thing, these videos take a huge amount of research and time to put together, because understanding how the legal system actually works matters to everyone, not just lawyers and accountants. So if you've made it this far, subscribe and share the video around, because a better informed citizenry results in better laws. So wrapping up, none of these changes exist in isolation, but together they tell us something very important about the direction of Australian lawmaking. More announcement date governance, more reliance on future drafting, more willingness to revisit settled expectations in pursuit of reform. Some people will think that that's justified, some won't. And I'm not telling you what to think, just what you can do if you want to, if you think it's important. But regardless of where you sit politically, the rule of law only works when ordinary people can reasonably predict the legal consequences of the decisions they make today. And right now, that certainty feels increasingly fragile. The finance commentators will cover the house prices and the interest rate story. That is their lane. Mine is the legal machinery underneath it. And right now, the machinery is changing.